I'm Tina Johnson, and welcome to Mind, Body, and Spirit. Tonight we have two guests with us. Bill Barnes, who is the author of the book, Thomas Andrews, A Voyage into History. This is the story of a man who suffered from overwhelming dreams and past life memories. As Bill began his past life regression therapy, he began to understand his connection to the Titanic. We also have with us Kevin Doheny. He is a local hypnotherapist and past life regression therapist. And both Bill and Kevin are going to help us to understand how regression therapy can help us to heal. Welcome.
Hi, Tina.
Hi. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Please tell us, the introduction was about past life regression therapy, regression therapy. What is regression therapy?
Well, regression therapy is simply remembering an earlier time under the state of hypnosis. And that time could be in this life, or it could be in what would appear to be a past life, in that you're bringing forth memories that you have no knowledge of in this time life, this time frame of this life.
Okay. Bill, I'd like to direct this question to you. You wrote the book, and it's an extraordinary story, but I want to know, why did you seek past life regression therapy?
Well, that's actually a long question. I'll try and make it short. I have had spontaneous memories of being, or of memories of another life or another individual from the time I can remember. And because of cultural and religious situations in my life, I was taught to suppress them. But because they were very strong in me all the time, I was constantly in a battle with myself. I began to believe at a certain point in my life that I was actually schizophrenic, because it was often that I was having two experiences at the same time, literally. Triggers would set things off for me. I might smell rust proofing that has just been recently put on an automobile, burning off the muffler, and it has a particular smell. And it would send me, even as a child, into remembering a shipyard where there's the noise and the acrid smell. It turns out now that that was the caulking that was put in between plates as they were being riveted, and the hot rivet burning that off. Now that I'm getting ahead of myself. At any rate, it got to be so bad that by the time I was 44, I really thought there was something wrong, and I had this hidden problem. I was hiding schizophrenia. I needed to seek psychiatric help. And the psychiatrist diagnosed me as severely depressed, but not as schizophrenic, and suggested that I go to a psychotherapist who could help.
Okay.
From that point, the psychotherapist said, I believe you were either going through some sort of psychodrama that is symbolic of a problem, or you could be having a past life memory. And the last thing I wanted to hear was a past life memory. All I wanted them to do was to give me a pill, make it go away. I wanted to go on with my life. Just fix it.
Just fix it.
Leave me alone. Yeah. I want to go. I just want to go on with my life.
Yeah.
And I want to finally be able to embrace this, Bill Barnes, and not have this other memory that I don't know where the heck it's coming from.
Yeah. When did these memories start for you? What age?
3. As I said, the earliest that I can remember.
Okay. And what were some of the things that would happen as well? I mean, would you smell something when you were 3, or what were some of your experiences with your parents? Or
some of the experience would be that my mother would be, calling me to dinner, or calling me somewhere in the house, and be calling Billy, Billy, and I'd finally come in and say, will you stop calling me Billy? My name is Tommy.
Oh.
And I'd then start to ask her, well, where are my brothers? Where's James? Where's John? Where's my sister Eliza? I have a brother Andrew, and I could not understand why my brother Andrew had my last name, why his first name was my last name. And it was very, very confusing. And they would try to humor me when I was very young, and every once in a while I'd get mad at my mother for some reason, and I'd say, as a very young child, I want you to write my Uncle William in Belfast straight away and tell him that I'm ready to come home.
How did your parents handle that?
My mother was very protective of me when I was a very small child. As I got to be older, there was a trigger experience that happened in 1959. NBC had Saturday Night at the Movies on at that time, and they were playing the movie Titanic with Barbara Stanwyck. Now, this movie premiered on April 14th, 1953, which is 41 years to the day of the accident. That's when Fox premiered this movie. It also happens to be the exact same day that I was born.
Oh.
So it was like somebody was heralding this. I mean, so many interesting parallels that come here.
Yeah.
41 years after the day of the accident to the day, and Titanic's hull number was 401, 41. All of these types of parallels.
Wow.
So there's the movie being shown on television. I said, that's my ship. And I'm describing the ship. I'm describing that it, it was lots of little holes. It wasn't a big hole. And why don't they show the ship break? And my father would just absolutely lost it with me. And dragged me upstairs. And at that time, they would call that good discipline. Nowadays, they would call it child abuse. But to put it bluntly, he beat the heck out of me.
Oh.
And then told me, I don't want you playing with your imaginary friend anymore. But being rather stubborn, or maybe it's just, dull, I said, it's not an imaginary friend, that was me. And that just invited a second beating after the first one I got.
No.
So
you're like completely confused.
Yes.
Totally confused. Wow. That had to be really challenging to live.
It was to suppress it, because then throughout my life I might be going through an experience where I'm talking to somebody, and we might be talking about a particular subject or a particular emotional issue, and while I am talking to that person, it was as if they were morphing into another individual from another time, and I'm going through two conversations at the same time. So you can understand why this is something that really challenges one's ability to stay focused on their reality.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like living in between the worlds.
Yes.
And getting too many messages and no boundaries between them.
Absolutely.
Wow. Now, Kevin, you actually help people go into regression therapy.
Yes, I do.
And you do this locally here in the Twin Cities.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see, well, let me just ask, what kind of cases or what kind of people and what kind of sessions do you actually see
Well,
here?
we don't always do regression therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of people are quite afraid to go into a regression. And I try to reassure them there's nothing scary about it. Bill's case is actually somewhat unusual. Bill's memories were just right below the surface there. And whereas most people recall very ordinary things when they drop into a past life, just about where they lived and who was around and cooking and so forth. So it really varies a lot from individual to individual as to how they react in this regressed state.
Okay. Now, Bill, did you have any resistance around regression when somebody suggested to you that maybe you should have this kind of therapy done?
When the suggestion was given me, quite frankly, I thought that the insane were running the asylum. And I didn't want to go.
Oh.
And I went through just basically to keep my wife happy. One thing that had my wife pushing this was that I was waking her up at night, and I was speaking in a brogue, and I was talking to somebody, and then she would actually wait, and it was as if I was listening to somebody, and then I would be responding back to them. So she had an interest in this because she wanted to find out, and one of the things also that came to a head is I was denying, I'm not speaking in my sleep, and she said, yeah, well, who is Bruce Ismay? So it's like, the cat's out of the bag, So if if I wanted to maintain an equilibrium and make sure that my wife was supportive, I was going to go there whether I liked it or not. That's basically what it was, and I didn't like it. And I kept giving poor Dr. Baranowski, rest his soul, a hard time about this, telling him how said hypnotherapist was leading said 44-year-old down the garden path. And it wasn't until a few...
You were kicking and screaming.
I was, and Frank used to joke with me. He said, well, you were in the stage of your therapy that I'd like to call smart ass. Frank was quite a character.
Yeah, that's great.
I really...
He called you, right?
Yeah, well, but he called it right as he saw it, you know. So a few weeks passed, and I thought, oh, God, I haven't heard from him. Forget this, you know. And he calls up, he says, well, now that you've kind of let it settle on some level, why don't you start putting the transcripts together and look at some historical basis? And I said, oh, I don't know if I can do the transcripts. That's a lot of work. And he said, oh, that's all right. I have them coming in the mail. I had them done for you. So, I mean, he was going to make sure that I had taken care of this.
Oh, boy.
But when I started to look at his life, and you see, when they do a regression, a good way to do it for something this spectacular and this much detail is to do it achronistically. Start somebody off maybe at age 20. Go back to age 5. Then go up to age 30, and at Tommy's case, age 39 when he died. Relive that. Go back and forth. Do that. When you finally put it into a line, if everything is consistent, if it seems to the information on that person's life then seems to build rather than to be disjointed, you have a really good clue that this is a past life. That's one, if you want to call it, verifier.
Okay.
When I did that, I found out this is very interesting. It does. And then Frank said, why don't you go look at the history of Titanic and maybe some of the other ships that were built in Harlan and Wolff. In one case, he had me regress to Tommy's age 27, and Tommy was talking about a ship called the Oceanic that was launched in 1899, and in 1900 it was being outfit then to go on its maiden voyage. Well, when I looked at the history of this, and I had to go into some very arcane history about a ship that was in no way related to Titanic, when he was 27, in 1900, they were outfitting a ship called the Oceanic.
Wow.
And
you knew nothing. You didn't study this
knew nothing about it.
In this life.
Well, the whole idea of Titanic, you know, I had to suppress it so much because of the reaction that when I was in high school, for example, we had a reading list in Catholic school, and one of them was A Night to Remember. I got 6 pages into the book, and it just brought up so much, and I remembered so many of the beatings that I got as a child. There was no way that I was even going to go near that. I ended up getting a beating at home because I didn't read the book, but finally the teacher relented after he saw a mark on my face when I came to school, and he had me read a senior level book, Beowulf as a matter of fact, and he said, you can do a report on that. And I did, and I got an A on it. But I was not going to read anything about Titanic. And it wasn't until my regression and then doing the subsequent research on it that I started to look at this. And the...
Let's talk about your regression. You know, what did it feel like when you were doing the regression?
I remember, one of the last things I remember as Frank was doing the relaxation part, or what they call the induction, I was chuckling to myself saying, this is never going to work. And then it was like I just went to sleep. The next thing I know, he's counting up. And as he's counting up about from 1 to 5, around 3, I'm gaining some awareness, and it felt like somebody put a syringe at the top of my head and just pressed all this information at once, and like instantaneously came into my being, and it just blew me away. I had my eyes open, and I look over, and my wife is in absolute tears, drenching her face and her blouse, and I look over at Frank, and of course it didn't help at the time, Frank being rather dramatic in his persona, said, "That was dramatic." I almost laughed, but I could see he was so sincere, and then looking at how my wife was crying, you know, it And then what was going through my mind? Well, I was blown away.
Yeah.
And then when I listened to the tape on the way home, I said, that's not my voice. It was a completely different voice, a completely different accent, a complete different use of syntax in English, and it was words that would not be used in 21st century English.
So what was your total reaction then? I mean, were you in denial?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Even then, we did 3 sessions, and even at the end of 3 sessions, I was not going to accept it. It's easier in our cultural norm to think when somebody's having this kind of experience, it's easier for them as the experiencer and for the therapist to say, well, you're just plain nuts. So why don't you take a pill, or we'll put you in a nice room or a nice home, and we'll let you work this out, and we'll let you work out your issues, rather than saying, maybe this is at the root of everything, and if we look into this and we can compare it to what's going on in your present life circumstance and look at the parallels of this, then maybe we can resolve your situation.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's one of the keys to past life therapy, is that there are often parallels between the lifetimes that you're remembering in the past and that you're experiencing right now, those parallels. And Bill, of course, can address that in great detail about the parallels between Tommy's issues in life and Bill's issues in life.
There are some parallels. What are those?
Well, there are just actual life parallels. That, for example, Tommy was the second son, and yet he was a junior. I was a second son, and I had my father's first name, William.
Junior.
Junior. They would call me Bill Jr., even though he had a different middle name, but they referred to me as Bill Jr. Another one was, in Tommy's family on his mother's side, the name William was a very important name that was given a special name passed on through the family. In my mother's family, Andrew, in this lifetime, was the name that was passed on that was big. My name was Andrews then, and William was important. My name is William now, and in this lifetime, Andrew was important. It's the universe didn't have a 2x4; it was a 2x8.
It's really hard, didn't it?
And even more and more parallels, such as what I told you about with the movie.
Wow.
Now, some of the emotional parallels that I begin to understand with Tommy is that in some way, as much as he knew, as competent as he was a shipbuilder, as thoroughly knowledgeable, he got locked into a conflict with White Star and even his uncle, who was the head of Harlan and Wolff, about half building these ships, as he called it. He used to say, we're sending out gilded eggshells out into the ocean. And he was concerned actually about either Titanic or Olympic, the 2 sister ships, Olympic, which went out first, because they had some, they were actually built less than what he had originally wanted.
Yes.
And so his fight was partially that he was looking for recognition, he was looking for validation in himself through others. And that has been an issue in my life. And to be able to look at that and say, I don't need someone else's validation, I'm all right the way I am, is oftentimes a very difficult love lesson for us to learn in our life, isn't it? And this
Absolutely.
And this literally took Tommy to his death aboard Titanic. And it has been something then that I've had to look for, because it's interesting. Not only have I had to look for validation just as myself as a person, I've had to then look for validation to say, these memories are actually, from the time I was a child, to validate them within myself.
Can we talk about, I listened to the tapes. They're very powerful. And I listened to the tape when Tommy was going down with the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotion that I felt, that I'm sure that Tommy, the emotion that was coming through your voice, in this lifetime, was incredible. Because of that emotion, is that part of what has locked into the soul as he was dying? Is there any way to recognize why these memories are so prevalent in this lifetime?
Well, as you probably heard at the end of the tapes, where Frank asked Bill, where he's kind of in this in-between place. He's not Bill and he's not Tommy.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked, what's the purpose of this lifetime now as Bill? And so that type of information can come forward. I don't recall the exact answer. I'm sure you do,
The
Bill.
exact answer was actually one that was coming from a place of ego in the mind, which was, I'm going to clear Tommy's name. So again, it was coming back and repeating the lesson of seeking validation. So one's life purpose does not necessarily have to be something that is going to be pure and noble. I'm going to learn to be a doctor and save people's lives. It can be, my life's purpose is to come back and screw up in the same thing or have to deal with that until I get it right.
Yeah. And it's about, carrying that lesson forward and then correcting, healing, and moving on.
Yeah.
How has learning about this past life and doing the regression therapy changed your life now from when you didn't know about it?
Well, I finally have permission to know that this is real. And in working with Frank, who then led me on to other organizations such as the International Association of Regression Research and Therapies, and then meeting Kevin through that and working with him in sound mind and body, I'm feeling now that because I was able to give myself that permission to learn to do that, to not have to seek out the validation, that it's actually that love and support is coming to me through people. And it's interesting, like I met Kevin, he and I we're best buds, and I think to myself, on one hand, where was this guy when I was growing up? I could have sure used him because it was because of where I was at in my own place that I would have never even accepted him. If he had come to me when I was 15, I would have probably gone like this, go away from me.
Yeah.
But now I'm prepared, so, it just opened up. It's like, now at 50, it would seem like everything before 44, 45 is just another lifetime, literally. And now I'm living into something where I'm growing forward. I've even now become a clinical hypnotist myself because I was so inspired by what Frank Baranowski did for me.
Wow, that's amazing. Would you recommend regression therapy or hypnosis for anyone?
Yeah, it can work on anything, really. Well, I won't say anything, but almost anything. I get clients for all different types of issues, and in some cases I do recommend to them that we would pursue some form of regression, whether if we go into a past life. It's kind of up to them almost. I'm not going to force them to go there. In fact, some clients can't go there because it just doesn't fit within their religious beliefs or whatever. If they were to experience a past life, it would really blow their whole view of the world and reality.
Yeah, that was one of my questions too, because I heard Catholic family, past life regression. What happened?
Yes, well, there were other experiences in my life that had taken me away from Catholicism, some of the hypocrisy I had dealt with that, and then other things. I would like to add something to what Kevin said here about regression. I agree with him that I would propose somebody going into past life regression, actually looking at that, if absolutely necessary. But I also feel that I'm telling my own clients that when you go into past life, when you open that door and you ask the universe to be given that treasure of knowledge about yourself, you automatically obligate yourself to resolve it in this sphere, and you're going to have to work at it. Now, if you're not willing to make that commitment, let's try and work this out in another manner.
Right.
Okay. So you open the door and it's like, okay, the floodgates are open.
And you are actually creating a karmic obligation where before there was none.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the other question that I have with that is, when you open up something like that, it's not about living back in that past, But it's about bringing those gems forward, isn't it? And integrating in
Right.
this lifetime.
There's a reason that you're remembering that stuff.
Mhm.
We've had many, many past lives. Do we remember them all? No, we don't. We only remember the ones which are trying to show us something at the present time.
Okay.
And ironically, I will have people say, "Oh, you made this up. Builder of the Titanic. Oh, bringing yourself, glorifying me, you have no life." Well, I've been a professional man all my life, working as a translator and a geographer for a good many years. I do have a life. This has bothered me. Now, why, though, somebody from history? The reason is that whether our lives play out on the world stage or whether they play out in a small hut in a
Tahiti.
desert island or Zimbabwe or something like that, you still have the same issues.
Mhm.
You still have the same issues. Thomas Andrews, renowned shipbuilder; Bill Barnes, regular government employee you could ignore, until his retirement. Still same issues. So that's what the key is. It's not a question of whether somebody was Cleopatra or
It doesn't
it
matter.
doesn't
No.
matter.
It's the lesson that you're
Yes.
here.
And quite frankly, I wouldn't wish on anybody to have the memories of what that man, Thomas Andrews, went through
Yeah.
the last 7 years of his life,
Yeah.
fighting to have those ships built right.
Yeah. Yeah. We just have less than a minute, actually, and I'd like to know if somebody's looking for regression therapy, what are they going to look for as a client? What makes a good therapist, and where
Okay.
can they go?
If they are looking for regression therapy, specifically regression therapy, as Bill mentioned, IART, which is spelled IARRT. They have a website, iarrt.org. That's the International Association for Regression and Research Therapies. And there's a listing on there of all the professional members organized by state, so they can find people who are
Okay.
qualified to do regressions through IART. Beyond that, they really have to be careful, Tina, because you can drop someone into a past life very easily.
Mm-hmm.
The therapy is another matter.
Absolutely.
Okay, so qualified, part of that organization that you mentioned, and Kevin, you're part of that organization, aren't you?
Oh, yes.
Yep,
As
I'm
is
here. As is Bill. Great.
Mhm.
If you were to leave a quick message with our audience, what would it be?
Well, regression therapy is nothing to be afraid of. Some of my clients who come to me with fears, I recommend regression therapy, and they're afraid of it. It's nothing to be afraid of. The subconscious will not permit you to recall anything which is going to be harmful to you. And in the hands of a regression therapist who is knowledgeable, there really is nothing to fear, even if you do experience something like a death in that lifetime, because the regression therapist can remove you from that experience. So it's not a scary thing.
Okay, it's safe.
It's
and it's
safe.
helpful, and look how it's helped Bill. Thank you very much for being on our show.
Thanks, Tina.